And here with me now, Democratic Congressman from Pennsylvania, Chris Deluzio. He's an Iraq war veteran and a member of the Armed Services Committee. And Congressman, you were one of those co-sponsors to that bipartisan war powers resolution, saying it is the responsibility of Congress to authorize declaring war. The president did not get authorization before launching these strikes on Iran. What is your reaction to where we stand right now?
Congress didn't authorize this. No president of any party has the ability on their own to start a war. Sending American aircraft over another country, dropping bombs, that's risking starting a war. And certainly the Congress has a role to play. I hope more of my Republican colleagues join us to stand up for the American people. I'm a veteran of the war in Iraq. I remember what that debate was. At least there was a debate. I think they got it wrong then. We've had no chance to have.
This week has the feel of a political pressure cooker about to blow its top. Everything that can rake the presidency, procedural maneuvers in Congress, old documents resurfacing, poll numbers plunging, in public optics gone sideways, is happening at once. That stacking of crises is not accidental. It's what turns isolated problems into a systemic problem, the kind that gnaws at loyalty, invites scrutiny, and forces politicians to show their hands. When politics becomes a multi-front fight, the objective stops being immediate victory and becomes rather damage control and narrative dominance. If you want to understand why this week feels different from the last rash of scandals, look at the combination: a discharged petition forcing votes, the release of Epstein documents that carry undeniable emotional weight, and a public that is demonstrably uneasy about transparency and leadership. Alone, none of these might topple an administration. Together, they're a coherent strategic pressure, a slow burn that erodes political capital and reshapes the record for the next election cycle. Start with the mechanics of oversight. When a lawmaker uses a privilege resolution, a special procedural tool that forces consideration of a measure, it's not theater. It forces the institution to act. That procedural trigger matters because it is designed to remove the option of indefinite delay. Leadership can try to table or deflect, but tabling itself requires a vote and a roll call. Votes produce a public record. They create a paper trail. And in politics, paper trails are lethal. They become the raw material for ads, for opposition research, and for every future town hall where constituents ask for explanations. The real potency here is not immediate conviction in the Senate. That's a remote possibility, but the relentless creation of political liabilities. Every time Congress votes, the choices are logged forever. That permanence magnifies the pressure on Republicans who represent swing districts or marginal seats. It's why a lawmaker like Al Green, who repeatedly files impeachment measures, understands the long game. He's not naive about conviction. He's counting on the record. Now add the Epstein files. These documents have a qualitative impact beyond the usual political leaks because they touch on human trauma and criminal behavior that generates visceral public reaction. Poll numbers show that offenses tied to sexual violence or exploitation register differently with voters. They are less about partisan calculation and more about moral alarm. When victims' claims and documents surface, even the appearance of proximity, the idea that a leader knew or had access to questionable activities, produces a political liability that's outsized compared to many other missteps. This is why the administration's handling of transparency around these files matters more than the specific content. Waffles, delays, or inconsistent explanations create a narrative that feeds suspicions of concealment. And once the narrative exists, it's exploited by both media and opponents. The political theater here becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. Documents appear, the administration explains or deflects, the public grows suspicious, polls slide, and allies twitch. The optics are amplified by what happened on the shutdown and the political wear and tear it caused. A 43-day shutdown, the transcripts figure, did structural damage to public perception. People remember inconveniences that affect daily life. Paychecks delayed, airports disrupted, public services shuttered. Those direct consequences get aggregated into a broader narrative about competence. Voters do not differentiate carefully between the actor who instigated the shutdown and the actor who negotiated the resolution. They remember the discomfort and assign blame. The poll results quoted in the transcript, drops in overall approval and especially poor marks on the Epstein response, are symptomatic of a larger trust deficit. Trust is hard to regain once it's been eroded. There's also internal party dynamics to examine. When loyalists begin to crack, when even stalwart defenders voice discomfort, the political coalition begins to fray. At a certain point, loyalty becomes contingent on political cost. Legislators look at their re-election maps, their margins, and the local media environment. If voting to protect the president is more costly than voting against him, the incentive flips. The transcript points to specific examples. Republicans signing a discharge petition, some even calling for tougher transparency. When these fissures appear, the party's messaging discipline frays. Outside actors, adversaries, donors, activists find openings. That's where the strategic danger lies. Not in the immediate math of conviction, but in the durability of vulnerability. Let's be blunt about the rhetorical tactics in the transcript. The narrator uses escalation language. The craziest week, unprecedented, full-blown political crisis, because that intensity sells engagement. It sharpens attention and converts curiosity into a sense of urgency. But rhetoric has limits. It can suggest inevitability, but it cannot substitute for proof. The piece often conflates plausible suspicion with incontrovertible fact. That matters because a democratic system should weigh evidence carefully, not merely follow the loudest narrative. The job of a critical reader is to parse what is verified from what is embellished. If you're repurposing this script for an audience, clearly mark which claims are documentary and which are interpretative. The latter is fine. Opinions help shape meaning. But readers should know which is which. Now take this into a practical communications playbook for both sides. For opponents, those seeking accountability, the strategy is to keep attention focused, document every claim, and force recorded choices. Every incremental release of material is a potential narrative pivot. Prioritize releases with clear, provable connections and avoid speculative insinuation. For the administration and allies, the correct reaction is not to swing wildly between denial and partial accommodation. That strategy looks like improvisation and amplifies mistrust. Instead, pick a consistent factual narrative. Acknowledge what can be acknowledged. Commit to transparent processes where possible, and avoid hyperbolic counterattacks that look like bullying jurors, e.g., sitting senators. In politics, attacking jurors rarely lands well. There is another political vector that is often underappreciated: the role of independent influencers and high-profile critics. When someone outside the political system, whether a billionaire tech figure or a popular commentator, publicly asserts uncomfortable claims, even if informal, that amplifies attention and gives other journalists a license to dig. The transcript cites Elon Musk's comments as emblematic of this phenomenon. Influential outsiders can move narratives from the fringe into mainstream discussion. For the administration, courting or neutralizing such actors can be crucial because they can quickly change the media's cost-benefit calculus over pursuing a story. Now pivot to the legal versus political distinction. The law is stubbornly technical. Politics is performative and cumulative. Legal guilt requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal context or sufficient evidence of impeachable offenses in congressional contexts. Political liability requires nothing near that standard. A combination of plausible associations, poor handling, and bad optics is enough to create a political problem. That asymmetry is both the weapon and the vulnerability of modern oversight politics. The smart tactic for any public figure is to reduce plausibility gaps and maintain a narrative of procedural legitimacy. Once the narrative of cover-up takes hold, it metastasizes, and it doesn't need judicial proof to damage careers. Consider the timing in the calendar. Filing articles of impeachment before Christmas isn't merely a holiday season stunt. It's a timing play. Holiday seasons compress attention and complicate media cycles and constituent engagement. For an opposition, filing in that window forces quick choices and deprives members of political breathing room. For defenders, an immediate counteroffensive becomes harder because resources are spread thin during year-end. Timing is a lever that manipulates operational constraints. It's not accidental. One of the most consequential effects of these layered crises is on the midterm horizon. The 2026 cycle will be shaped by the narratives that are entrenched today. For swing district Republicans, a vote to stand with or against the president will be a campaign artifact. Opponents will brandish any vote as the climax of a moral or political failure. The tactical calculus is protect the president and risk being tied to scandal, or distance yourself and face primary backlash from the base. That binary forces agonizing choices and produces political paralysis. It is why the long game approach of repeatedly forcing votes is a high ROI strategy for the opposition. You convert temporary outrage into enduring political ammunition. Now let's talk about the human element. Painful as it is to summarize, allegations tied to sexual violence and trafficking are not political abstractions. They involve people who were harmed, and that human reality should change how institutions respond. Political operatives often forget that victims and human consequences deserve priority over partisan wins. A healthy political response would center victim privacy and dignity while balancing the public's right to oversight. Mishandling that balance looks callous and fuels the perception of concealment. This is not merely an ethical point, it's a pragmatic one. The public sees when human reality is being used as political cover and resents it. At another level, consider the erosion of institutional trust. When major institutions, whether judicial, executive, or investigative, are perceived as opaque or captured by partisan interests, the default public reaction is suspicion. That suspicion is a force multiplier for political crises because it widens the pool of concerned voters beyond the opposition's base. Surveillance of institutions, accountability mechanisms, and genuinely independent investigations act as pressure valves for democracy. When those valves are clogged or perceived as compromised, political pressure builds. So what should a politically literate audience take away from this week? First, expect incrementalism. Document releases will drip, not flood. Each drop will produce headlines and new pressure points. Second, don't read inevitability into hyperbole. Scandal helps create vulnerability, but it doesn't automatically produce legal or political removal. Third, recognize the durability of records. Votes and documents last. They will be used again and again. Fourth, observe ally behavior. When loyalty frays, that's often the clearest signal of political stress. Finally, demand clarity. Ask for citations. Ask for evidence. Distinguish between allegations and proven facts. The difference matters enormously when reputations and institutional authority are at stake. Now I'll switch to a plain language narrative you could use as a script for a video or speech, but still informed by the analysis above. Read it as a pointed explainer intended to cut through noise and give viewers usable context. Picture a stage with multiple spotlights. Each light reveals a different problem, but all of the lights point at the same actor. On one side, you have Congress, standing with a procedural hammer in hand, a privilege resolution that forces a recorded vote. On another side, you have a folder, the Epstein documents, whose contents include private messages and names that make the public flinch. Overhead, a scoreboard shows approval ratings sliding, with a steep drop on the specific issue of transparency. At the center is the presidency, surrounded by allies who are fidgeting, some whispering support, and others quietly asking for distance. That's the scene for you. This isn't cinematic hyperbole. The mechanics matter. A forced vote creates permanence. Documents create moral friction. Polls convert suspicion into measurable political cost. Al Green's move is not an act of theatricality alone. It's a strategic play to keep the institution honest. It turns private misgivings into public record. It compels choices. And when choices are recorded, they get used. In campaigns, in headlines, in history.